I'm going to do in 20 minutes or less is cover a lot of ground, which I think hopefully incorporates, why we're all here. So when, and some of you know us from the ASU GSV Summit, some of you know us from our investment activities, some of you know us from our kind of incubating and helping startups, bring their ideas to life. But all this is incorporated around the idea, and why we started this from the beginning. So from day one, the common denominator with what's brought all this together is that our objective with this big, hairy, audacious goal is to ensure that everybody has equal opportunity to participate in the future. And how we're going to do that is we're going to bend the arc of human potential. Why? Because we believe the future of society depends on this. And that's that's obviously an incredible aspiration. But we think, and you look at what's going around, not only just in the United States, but around the world, this issue of people feeling like they're not having the opportunity to participate in the future is a fundamental reason why we think that there is a number of the issues that exist. Well, how are we going to do, but what are some of the impediments to this? So, and we obviously believe that this is, the kind of fundamental, the core foundation to participate in the future is education. And how do we give everybody an equal opportunity to get the kind of education, the kind of knowledge that they require to have a productive life? So what are some of the hurdles to this? Time, money, technology, engagement, access, gender. These are all basic issues. And those are issues from an investment standpoint, from just what we're focused on standpoint, and how do we eliminate those issues? But it's more complex and bigger than this, because the other issues that exist to make this a reality, poverty, food, shelter, health, safety, race. These are all gigantic impediments to give everybody an equal opportunity to participate in the future. Because the fact of the matter is, if you're hungry, it's hard to think about how I want to code. And so Martin Luther King Jr., 55 years ago, just kind of a mile down the road, said, I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And we think that that is foundational. That we really do have that type of society that really focuses on its merits. We also, in this room, all know it's really kind of like a whack-a-mole. You kind of hit one issue, and then another issue pops up. And so you can't. There's no silver bullet of how we're going to accomplish this. But we do feel like we don't need 7.7 billion people in the world to figure this out. We actually believe the people in this room can help us get to this very significant aspirational goal. Again, so when you're worried about how do I get water that I can drink, you're not so focused on your calculus. But this isn't just a third world issue. This is less than 5 miles from where we're sitting right now. I mean, the issues that people face every single day. My daughter was a teacher in Washington, D.C. at KIPP. And the issues that she faced every single day was just unbelievable. How do you have somebody focus on learning how to read, how to do science and so forth, when you're worried about, where am I going to, get my dinner tonight? The UN, I don't know how many people here are familiar with this, but I think this is a pretty interesting framework that they came out with in 2016, talking about, they call it the Sustainable Development Goals. But I think this is all, some of the rubric that we need to think about, not just, how do we get an education technology, how do we just, how do we do some very specific thing? It's a really comprehensive solution that the people in this room and what we're trying to cover in the next couple of days, and certainly the summit and the investment ideas that we're looking at, we need to have this kind of comprehensive view. So poverty, hunger, quality education, obviously, clean water, gender equality. And so you look at, good news is I think these issues are being addressed. And so, the United States, and this might surprise you, 43% of the engineers and computer scientists today are women. That's up dramatically, right? And if you want to know, who do you think is the most progressive company in the world? IBM? Well, Ginny Ramadi, she's retired but progressive. But nobody's more progressive than Amazon because they created the wealthiest woman in the world overnight. Sorry, bad humor. And put a context on everything. So if the world were 100 people, just quickly, obviously it's roughly 50% male, 50% women. Looking at the world from where people live, 60% are Asians. And by the way, when you look at demographics, it's a younger population. It's only going to become more that way. From a religion standpoint, 31 out of 100 are Christians, 23 out of 100 are Muslims, 15 Hindus, 6 Buddhists. Look at language, 12 out of 100 Chinese, 6 out of 100 Spanish, 5 English, Hindi, 3 Arabic. And so what's interesting is 70% of the world speaks 6,500 other languages. But the good news for the people in this room, I think, is the race is over. English has won. Native-speaking English people, 375 million. In 2016, 1 billion people spoke English. Today, 2 billion people speak English. And if you want to start a business, I promise you one of the great areas to focus on is teaching English to the rest of the world because that is the growth industry. 84% of the world, or 84 out of 100, are literate. 16 out of 100 are illiterate. But again, just kind of basic fundamental issues. 13 people out of 100 don't have access to clean water. And almost a quarter of the world's population doesn't have shelter. That's fundamental issues. When you look at poverty in the United States of America, 52% of the low-income kindergarten students aren't ready to start kindergarten. If you start behind, it's hard to ever catch up. And what is the reality of that? Yet in the United States of America, one of the world's most prosperous nation, you got 4 states in the United States of America in 2000 that had 50% or more of the students that came from low-income households. What's happened in this boom that we've seen in the last 20 years? Now you got 20 states out of 50 that have 50% or more of their households are below 50%, are below poverty. And so what's the reality of that? Well, if you're a low-income student, you're 5 times more likely to drop out of high school. You are 8 times more likely to go to prison. Prison population, 80% of the prison population is made up of high school dropouts. So again, when you think about problem solutions, gigantic problem, gigantic opportunity. From an investment standpoint, today, $1 invested in pre-K returns $7. So it's the greatest return that you can, there is anywhere in terms of investment return. So looking at wealth or lack of wealth in correlation between SAT scores. So the SAT score is the kind of ticket to the prestigious universities. There's a direct correlation between your SAT score and your household income. So what the SAT score best predicts is how wealthy your family is. 75% of the students in elite schools come from the top 25% household incomes. And if you come from a bottom quartile household, you have an 8% probability of graduating from any college. Obviously, we all know there's a direct correlation between your level of education and income. And so you add this all up, and if you're born poor, there's a 70% probability that you'll remain poor. So this concept of the American dream is really not real. So effectively, the system that we have today is the admissions director at Harvard is the hiring director at Google. 10% of the Fortune 500 companies, CEOs come from Ivy League schools. 30% of the U.S. senators, and I guess we're going to have a couple come here, went to Ivy League schools. 100% of the Supreme Court justices, 100% of the last 5 U.S. presidents. So basically, we have a system that is rigged. The 8 wealthiest people in the world control 50% of the world's wealth. 7.7 billion people, the richest 8 people control 50% wealth. So effectively, your success, your future is determined by how well you select your parents. And people appreciate that just isn't right. That's not fair. It's a rigged system. So Aristotle said, inequality is the parent of revolution, and you don't have to go too far to realize that we are in a system today that is boiling, right? We got to fix it. We'll talk about some of the solutions. Artificial intelligence is a little bit, I think, like the Loch Ness Monster. People claim they see it, but in education, it's really hard to really grab it. But we do believe that this is going to be an important part of the future once we finally get it right. And some of the analogy I think of when I think about artificial intelligence in education is looking at autonomous cars. How many people either have a Tesla or have driven in a Tesla with their autonomous driving? Okay, it's pretty cool, right? But what's that? Would you bet your life on it? No, I wouldn't bet my life on it either. But it's interesting because what statistics show you is there's 1.3 million car accidents a year. And what's estimated is autonomous driving will eliminate 90% of those deaths. So there's a pretty strong incentive to use this kind of technology to make the driving experience more safe. If you have 3 bad teachers in a row, you're statistically dead. So AI in education isn't about replacing the teacher, but it's how do you enhance this experience so you can make sure that every student has the equal opportunity to get the education they need, the knowledge they need to be successful. We're all familiar with the PISA scores. This is just kind of an interesting map showing, green, good, yellow, trouble, red, bad, around the world in terms of how test scores are. And almost 40 years ago, A Nation at Risk came out, and we've had this kind of series of different innovation or reforms that have taken place that have basically resulted in a PISA score that shows us in trouble, and the NAEP scores that came out late last year show absolutely zero progress, despite a lot of good intent, right? So 40 years ago, the Secretary of Education, T.H. Bell, said, if a foreign power imposed our education system on us, we'd consider an act of war. And I think that's you could say the same thing today as you said 37 years ago. So it's just, enough is enough. We don't have any more time. It's unconscionable to think that we can allow this to continue as is. And this is not a new idea. This afternoon you're here from Bill Milliken and Robert Carpenter. They're going to show a little film that's going to be premiered at the summit in end of March about the American dropout. Good news is dropout statistics, we've gone from 79% of high school students graduating to now 85%. So we've made some progress. But if you were in the airline industry and you said you got an 85% likelihood of making it safe to your destination, the airline industry wouldn't exist, right? It would stop, it would cease, right? And effectively, what we got is you've got a system basically where these are living dead. I mean, they're dying. I mean, if you don't graduate from high school, forget all the other stuff. You're dead. And that is, again, we've got to do something about it. Some of the answer that people say is we've got STEAM and STEM and everybody needs to be a coder. And by the way, I'm all for coding. I mean, that's a great skill, just like speaking and writing and so forth. But the problem, and you're seeing it, if you think that is your future, I mean, it's going to be a commodity. It's just a basic skill. I mean, it's not going to be the differentiator. It's basically what you need to have. And so what I talk about is so as you think about automation, you think about technology replacing jobs, and 50% of the jobs that exist today, McKinsey estimates are going to be gone in the next 20 years. What are those skills that people need? And I call it the 7 C's, because these 7 C's really are the foundation of, I believe, of what the future is, the knowledge you need to be successful. The first C is critical thinking. Guess what? Robots don't solve problems. Robots process information. So critical thinking is a core skill. Creativity. And part of creativity is entrepreneurship. You look at 69% of the college students today want to work at a startup. 80% of high school students want to be an entrepreneur. When I went to high school, I didn't know what an entrepreneur was, right? And I don't think many people did. But that's the future. 45 million jobs have been created in the last 30 years from startups. Well, 5 million have been taken out of the Fortune 500. Communication, not just speaking, but texting and PowerPoints and everything else. How do you communicate with people? Cultural fluency. The world is getting smaller. The world is getting more connected. Understanding other cultures, other religions, other ways that people do things. Civic engagement. We just had this conversation last night. I think that's a huge area. Collaboration. And how do you teach collaboration? Well, China thinks it's through sports. So President Xi has made a big priority of sports, and that's part of it. And I whether it's sports or other ways that you learn how to be a team, that's a key focus. Character. I mean, we've seen many examples, and I live in Silicon Valley, and Silicon Valley's under siege a little bit because success doesn't necessarily equate just with your financials. It's what are the principles that you have. Looking at some of the fundamentals of the future, higher education is the world has figured out that knowledge in a knowledge economy is important, and so in 1900 there was 500,000 global students, right? Pretty small market today. That's 207 million. That's up from 160 million 15 years ago. In the next 10 years, what do you think it's going to be? Double that. 414 million. So how is that capacity going to be filled? Well, one is to understand who the college student is today. So 70% of higher ed students today are non-traditional. So what's traditional? You're 18 to 22-year-old full-time student. So, colleges are set up for these students. So they have, they have the campus. They have semesters. You can take class twice. You can register for class twice a year. Dormitory, football team, marching band, which is all basically irrelevant for 70% of the student population today. You look at companies like Coursera. They're creating the world's learning campus. 50 million students on their platform today from around the world. Almost 80% of their students come from outside the United States. Some of the concepts that we believe that are going to meet this demand, Hollywood meets Harvard, creating the kind of engagement and the kind of media business models that you see from Hollywood, be put in the education market. I think more people have learned American history from Hamilton than they have from a textbook. And invisible learning without actually recognizing that's what you're doing. So it's playing games and other ways that you're acquiring that knowledge. We call this higher ed, and so this kind of link between learning and earning is a key fundamental. So it's kind of like peanut butter and jelly. You know, you don't necessarily think that that's supposed to come together, but when it does, it's delicious, right? And as you think of the corporation, it's obtain, train, retain is their key fundamental to compete in the global marketplace, a knowledge-based economy where what you know makes a difference for an individual, company, and country. On the supply side, what millennials are saying is the number one thing they're looking from in the corporation that they're working at is training and development. You know, it's not money, it's not flexibility. Number one, education. So education as a benefit is a megatrend. Rachel Carlson is going to be speaking later. She was on the cover of Forbes recently. She looks just as good as she does in the picture right in the corner here. But this is a megatrend. You know, how do you attract and retain and develop people? You know, it's what healthcare was 30 years ago. Education is today. But it's not necessarily kind of the traditional education that you think of. So Jamie Dimon, and you saw this month's Fortune, said the future of work is skills, so stop worrying about degrees. And I think that's critical. It's what you know, not where you go. It's knowledge, not college. And again, it's nothing against degree, but that's not the only thing. And in fact, I think the big market is outside of that. But you look at the issue for a corporation, from a plus standpoint, they need knowledge workers, so they need to skill and reskill people. Millennials value training above all else, so that's how you attract them. The negative is the average millennial works at a company for 2.5 years. And how do you create an ROI on that short tenure? And by the way, I don't have the answer, but entrepreneurs will. So figuring out that it's just a mega opportunity that exists to be thinking about how you're going to address the key issues. I don't know if you paid attention to Davos, which took place a couple of weeks ago. Interestingly, what they really talked about was the future of work. I mean, they had this kind of, they keep on focusing on kind of where the world's going, and it's good. But what they talked about is the shift in terms of the corporate future from being, the corporation's constituency was a shareholder, and now it's what they look at as a stakeholder. And I think that kind of touches on something that we've talked about and we think about and we look at the future and how this all fits together and how do we bend the arc of human potential and how do we, how does education and knowledge, fit into this. I think it all fits within this framework, which we talked about, in 1776, Adam Smith talked about in The Wealth of Nations, basically was the birth of capitalism. And he talked about this invisible hand. So if you align economic incentives with how you wanted people to behave, things kind of worked out. That was just this invisible hand that guided people's behavior. In the same year, 1776, Thomas Jefferson wrote in the Declaration of Independence that everybody had this inalienable right to pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Right? Same year. Two core principles, right? If you look at this issue of capitalism, 60% of millennials say that they think socialism is better than capitalism. Bernie saying, and this is not a political statement, but just looking at reality, and some people say, well, that's because these young people just don't know anything. And it's not true. What's really going on is, they're seeing the system that they're in, and they're saying it's rigged, it's not fair, right? And so this invisible hand is broken. It's broken. George Washington in 1789 talked about a different invisible hand, which was that people's behavior, what they were seeking, was a higher purpose, higher meaning. They were really seeking, it's amazing how many conversations I've had about this recently, but people, young people, they're seeking something different. They're seeking, real purpose and meaning in their life. And that's a different type of invisible hand. So what I believe is that, the broken invisible hand of Adam Smith can be fixed by George Washington's invisible hand, and that is this new meaning. And people are seeking meaning through their learning. And they're seeking purpose through their work. And this is what I call, education is really life's original accelerator. And so this new invisible hand that I think is being created is what I call the health of nations. And I think that's where this all comes together, and that's where we create the solution to the biggest issue facing the future, which is how we have everybody have an equal opportunity to participate in the future. So the next couple of days, we're going to hear a lot of great ideas and get a lot of information, insight about where we're at and where we're heading. But how this all comes together, I think, is this new invisible hand that we're quite excited about. So Martin Luther King also said, we talk about bending the arc of human potential. What Martin Luther King said is the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And that's what we believe we're doing here today. Thank you very much.